Today we're cracking open a pretty controversial book, The Art of Psychological Warfare. We're going to distill the core techniques it lays out. Now, this isn't about magic or anything like that. It's presented as a practical manual for influencing other people, whether you're using it for good or for something a little more sinister. Let's dive in. So, right from the jump, the book hits you with this super direct, kind of provocative question. It doesn't mess around. It's making it clear that this is all about power. You know, the kind of power that politicians, CEOs, and big-time leaders seem to have. But the author's whole argument is that this isn't some gift from the heavens. It's a skill that anyone can learn.
So, how exactly do you wield this kind of power? Well, the book doesn't really frame it as manipulation. Instead, it calls it a learnable skill, something that computer hackers would call social engineering. Essentially, what we're looking at is a user's manual for hacking the human brain.
And look, social engineering isn't just for some shady characters in the movies. These exact same techniques are used by police to get confessions, by governments to shape public opinion, and of course by advertisers to get you to buy stuff. It's literally happening all around us, all the time.
But it's not all about going on the offensive. The author makes a huge point that knowing these tactics is actually your best defense. Take the actor Benedict Cumberbatch. Back in 2005, he was kidnapped at gunpoint in South Africa, and he literally talked his way out of it. He convinced his kidnappers that hurting a famous British actor would stir up a massive international mess. I mean, talk about acting for your life. And here's a brilliant example of the power of a single, perfectly placed move. It's 1783, and George Washington is facing a full-blown military rebellion. His own officers are furious. He wasn't even supposed to speak, but he gets up on stage, and before he reads his address, he kind of fumbles for his glasses and says this line. In that one instant, all the anger in the room just evaporated. It turned into shame and sympathy. The rebellion was over before his speech even really started. Okay, let's get into the foundational skills. According to the book, all influence, whether you're defending yourself or persuading a whole crowd, it all starts with one thing: observation. You have to learn how to read what people aren't saying out loud. To really demystify this, the book breaks down how stage psychics do what's called cold reading. It's actually a super methodical process. See, they start with a vague, high-probability guess, like throwing out a common name in a big crowd. Then they just watch for a reaction, a tiny flinch, a glance between two people. And that's when they zero in. The psychic isn't reading minds, they're reading the person and then letting that person fill in all the blanks for them. Now, the reason this works so well is because of something called the Barnum effect, named after the famous circus showman. It's when you make statements that are so general they could apply to pretty much anyone, but to the person hearing them, they feel deeply personal. It's basically how horoscopes work. And when people feel understood like that, they become incredibly open to suggestion.
So, once you've gotten good at reading people, how do you start to actively influence them? This brings us to what the book calls the light side of psychological tactics, the art of persuasion. A really key tool here is something called neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. The whole theory is that certain words, you can call them power words, literally light up the neurons in our brains. Words like new, proven, guarantee, and especially the word you. Advertisers are masters at this. They use these words constantly to trigger the reward and security centers in your brain. And you can actually use this in a normal conversation. The book lays out this simple 4-step hack. First, you build a subconscious connection by subtly mirroring their body language. Then, you get them nodding along by just stating a few obvious truths. This creates a pattern of agreement. So when you finally introduce your own idea with a simple little transition like, and so, their brain is already primed to go along with you. It's a really subtle, but pretty powerful way to guide someone toward your conclusion.
Okay, so buckle up, because the techniques are about to get a lot more intense. We're shifting gears from gentle persuasion to the kind of ethically murky tactics that are designed for winning a direct conflict.
This is where you get into serious misdirection. A classic example a book gives is the Kansas City Shuffle. This is where your opponent knows a con is happening, but you cleverly make them focus on the wrong one. Just think about the Allied forces in World War II. They masterfully convinced Germany that the massive D-Day invasion at Normandy was just a trick, a diversion for the real invasion happening at Calais. It was the ultimate shuffle on a global scale.
For a more systematic approach, the book details the Reed technique. This is a psychological process that law enforcement has used for decades to get confessions. It's really like a 9-step dance designed to break down a suspect's resistance. It starts with direct confrontation, but then it shifts to minimizing the crime, stopping any denials, and even offering sympathy. All of it is designed to make confessing feel like the only logical and even relieving option available. All right, we've now reached the book's darkest chapter. This is what it calls the dark arts. These are the most extreme, most damaging techniques, designed not just to influence someone, but to completely dominate them.
First up is gaslighting. This is a truly nasty form of mental abuse where the attacker manipulates the victim until they start to doubt their own sanity. It works by just systematically denying their reality. The abuser twists the truth until the victim starts to believe that the violence was actually their own fault or that their memories aren't real. It's just a slow, horrible erosion of a person's entire sense of reality.
And that leads to the final and most extreme technique in the book, brainwashing. This is described as the complete destruction of a person's identity, only to be rebuilt in the manipulator's own image. Through things like isolation, creating dependency, and constant fear, cult leaders can create these willing puppets who are totally and completely under their control.
And if you think this is all just theory, it is terrifyingly real. This number, this represents the people who died in the Jonestown mass suicide in 1978. Over 900 men, women, and even children willingly drank poison, all at the command of one man, Jim Jones. That is the ultimate, devastating power of psychological domination.
So, after going through all of these powerful and frankly pretty disturbing techniques, we have to come back to the book's central moral question. What do you do with this kind of knowledge?
Here's the crucial point the author makes. The bad guys already know this stuff. By learning how these tactics work, how a cold reader operates, how an advertiser uses those power words, how an abuser gaslights someone, you can learn to recognize them. You can build a defense. In this case, knowledge really is your armor.
And that leaves us with the final question, the one the book really wants you to think about. Is this knowledge a weapon, something to be used on other people? Or is it a shield, something to protect yourself? The book lays out the whole manual, but in the end, how it gets used, well, that's up to you.